Welcome into the Hot Read podcast for Wednesday, Wednesday, August the 28th. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, Director of Published Content. I was one of the A months. I had a 50-50 chance. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, Director of Published Content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We're also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network, and I am joined, as always, by producer JT. You can follow us both on social media at Easton Freeze and at JT_Ruhnke. And the Titans have officially cut down their 53-man roster. JT, what was the defining moment of the day for you?
Quentin Bohanna getting out of witness protection, probably. That's mine.
Good for him,
think,
man. That's awesome.
There is
for
a
me,
lot.
It was Robert Javier making it all the way to the 3 p.m. deadline without it being leaked that he got cut.
If
he
you
did
want a
get
real
cut
answer,
eventually, but
if you want a real answer, the
Sure.
defining moment of the day would happen about 5 or 6 minutes ago when I came in second place in the pool, 53-man prediction pool. So I beat you and Sam and PK and Tehran and Terry and everybody. Nick bested me, but you know what? I think that was my defining moment, mostly because guess who ended up making the roster that I kept saying sneakily was going to make the roster?
The Luke
and ended
Gifford
up doing
man
it.
cometh.
Yes, it's been a wild day for the Titans for sure, and that's it. Nothing else of note for this podcast has happened or anything like that. So
That's right.
Everything just moves on.
We've got a lot to talk about. The Titans made a big trade. Was it the big trade of cutdown day? Was there? I don't think there was a bigger national trade than Rand Carthen getting on the phone, cooking up a little bit. So we'll talk about the newest Tennessee Titan, Ernest Jones, at the linebacker position. The surprise cuts, more surprise keeps than surprise cuts, in my opinion. Some very lopsided position rooms in terms of numbers. What we expect the Titans are probably still working on between now and the start of the season, shopping in the waiver wire bargain bin for some guys at certain positions, cornerback. We'll talk about all of that later on in the show. First, to address the elephant in the room, if you follow me on social media, I posted on Monday morning that this is my last week working for Broadway Sports Media and the 440 Podcast Network. It has been a pleasure to do all of this, and I'm not going to do a big fond farewell because this is one of 2 episodes I have left. So we don't want to bury the lead of the 53-man roster cut down. Some folks listening, frankly, don't care, and I respect that. So at the end of the show, we'll talk more about it. And on Thursday's show, which is my last show here on the show that I started just over 3 years ago. No, almost 3 years ago. Just kidding. Just under 3 years ago. Leaving that to, I guess the only note that you need to know at the top of the show, the Hot Read podcast, in fact, not dying. In fact, only getting bigger and better now that they have found a way to get rid of me and take my name off of the marquee. Producer JT, the guy's dead and gone. We took him out back behind the barn, shot him in the head, and we brought in host JT, a person that, let's be honest, producer JT, more a moniker the past 6 months or so than it was a reality. He has been co-host JT for a while now, and so I am excited and have full confidence in him taking over after this week alongside the newest co-host on the Hot Read podcast, Stoney Keeley. That was announced yesterday on a football show. So I am stoked to be in the comments with you all in the afternoons during the week as these two guys carry that mantle, take the torch into the new season. But again, more on that at the end of the show and on Thursday, which is my last show. Let's dive into the 53-man roster. Oh, but wait, one last bit of housekeeping. If you are with us live today, and there are many of you, we appreciate you being here. Thanks for hanging out with us and reacting to the mayhem that just occurred. Do us a favor. Make sure you're watching over on Broadway Sports Media's YouTube page. If you're not doing that, if you're on Twitter or you're on Facebook, leave those places. Head to YouTube, search for Broadway Sports Media, find this live stream there. And in the comment section, that is where you can be a part of the conversation, like Alex and Lucas and Jacob and Kenneth. Josh asking, Easton is still here. Yes, I am, in fact, still here. You haven't gotten rid of me just yet. But we appreciate all of you guys. Jake saying, Easton holding up the show one last time for old time's sake. That's right. I need to lean into every little bit as much as I possibly can, one of which is being late to my own show. And we accomplished that today. So with that being said, and make sure you're liking, subscribing, all of those things. Let's start with the trade, the big trade of the day. The Titans going after Ernest Jones, JT. They make a trade for the biggest linebacker on the market at this point. Somebody that, did we mention on Thursday? I don't think we did, because I don't think it had come out quite yet that he had been given permission to be traded by the Rams. But I believe it was Friday, maybe Saturday. I think it was Friday that the Rams announced they had given their young star linebacker, Ernest Jones, just 24 years old, permission to seek a trade. He disputed on social media whether or not he actually asked for a trade, but a trade is what he got, whether he wanted it or not. The Titans secure Ernest Jones for basically nothing. We're talking about 2026, so not this upcoming draft, but the following draft. The Titans send a 5th round 2026 pick, and they get back Jones and a 6th round 2026 pick. So the Titans move from the 5th back to the 6th round 2 drafts from now in order to bring in Ernest Jones, who is on the last year of his rookie contract. So $3-some-odd million accrued, or not accrued, but designated to him this season. And he will almost certainly be getting a contract extension, one would imagine, to justify this move. The Titans are going to want to keep this guy around, I think, JT, because he's a really talented young player. You look at just his athletic profile, extremely explosive athlete, long athlete, fantastic in a downhill run game, downhill blitzing defense. And if you're saying, hey, that sounds a whole lot like what the Titans are going to run with Denard Wilson, you're right, my friend. And that's why when we heard this news over the weekend, JT, I know you and I on Twitter talking about how it would make a lot of sense for the Tennessee Titans to go after that guy. Too bad they have like 6 rosterable linebackers. They probably aren't going to do that. They're going to stick to their guys they've been working with all month. And then we heard over the weekend, or things developed over the weekend, Chance Campbell out for the year with his ACL. Terrible, terrible news. Cedric Gray, the 4th round draft pick, an indeterminate timeline on his nerve shoulder injury, which is a scary thing to hear about. So, okay, maybe this is more of a reality. And I did Fox Sports Radio in Knoxville this afternoon. They asked me about this, and I said, I mean, it could happen. I'd kick the tires. I'd be afraid of what the compensation looks like, because he's a good enough player in my eyes to demand a day 2 pick. Talking about a 3rd, maybe a 4th round pick in return. And that's not even close to what happened. Folks around the league on Twitter seemed kind of perplexed by that. Well, this guy's worth more than that in compensation. I'm shocked that Rand Carthon got away with it. So in my opinion, this gets thrown around too often. It's very watered down. A Rand Carthon masterclass. I think this actually was a Rand Carthon masterclass. JT, what about you?
Yeah, my biggest takeaway from this trade, I think the kids call it a fleece. And that's kind of incriminating myself. I'm not that
like
old
the sweater?
to be saying it.
No?
I shouldn't. Yeah, I mean, it was pretty peculiar of the compensation, right? Because I think I was in the same boat, getting the guy who presumably has been talked about as the leader of this Rams defense after Aaron Donald retired. Like, he was going to be that guy.
I believe Aaron Donald literally said to him, hey, you're the guy now, right?
Yes.
Isn't that a quote that came out today? Okay.
I believe so. And so when you take that into consideration, that they just basically traded their new leader for a 6th round pick or 5th round
belly
pick
button lint, a couple old pennies,
2 drafts. Yeah. Paper clips.
Lozenge.
That's all they really did. And I think the biggest thing with this is the contract. I think that's why the compensation is the way it is. And I think all of us around the league have kind of watched the incompetence of the New York Jets organization this offseason with how they've gone about their trade for a person disgruntled.
Love the Jets catching some strays on a cut down Tuesday.
Contract.
Sure.
However, I do think that while this trade is nice, I would expect them to try and get this contract done, or at least an extension in a hurry, because it also fills a hole that I think even bridging the gap between both the Vrabel and in the new Callahan era, this is a guy who the team has been desperately missing since really, David Long, when he came on to the team here and was surprising a lot of people. They have not had that leadership type green dot guy to really rally around on the defense. And like you said, I echo as well, the way that he will fit into the Denard Wilson defense and the ability to get downhill while also continuing to be pretty solid in coverage. I would say I'm really happy with the trade they did today to get him. And I think it makes me, in my mind, a lot more comfortable with the linebacker situation. And of course, I'm now comfortable with the linebacker situation, but
you mean all 7 of them? Those guys?
Yeah, I mean, if they keep
let me quadruple check my notes here.
I guess it's hard.
There are 7 of them. Yeah.
I guess it's hard to not be comfortable when you have 7 guys on a roster at one spot, right? But comfortable more with the talent that they're going to roll out there with the starters, and kind of moving Jack Gibbons into that more rotational role makes me feel puts me at ease a lot more. And I mean, you talk about a guy who is, like you said, ascending. A lot of people were scratching their heads about, this guy only was traded for a pick in 2 years. Well, yeah. I mean, if you look at, obviously PFF grades aren't everything, but if you look at
nothing.
They mean nothing. However, if you look at his kind of trajectory that he's gone on the past 3 years, started out in 2021 with a grade of 59.3. In 2022, that ascended to a 63.6. And then this last year, it's been his best year with an 82.1 PFF defense grade. I mean, this is a guy who has continued to get better and better and finding his role in the way he likes to play defense. And I think that's something that the Titans are really trying to cash in on and capitalize on right now. And so that trade today, really, I mean, it's going to be a lot of domino effects throughout the rest of this roster, because yes, I really don't think at the end of the day, once this trade is finalized, they end up keeping 7 linebackers. Like, I just don't think that, it's all nice and well that they have 6 on the roster right now with Ernest Jones coming in, but I think one of them ends up getting waived or cut later on this week once that trade is official.
I have a guess as to who. I'll reserve that for now, but I'm afraid it's might be your boy. But hey, technically you were right, so that's all that matters.
Technically I was right. Technically special team ace.
That's right.
Beat out the special team demon.
I'm gonna say that is a good point. Wow, the ace beat out the demon. That's a great point. Didn't even put that together. The last thing on this before we move on, you mentioned the green dot. We know that Kenneth Murray was the one designated for that role, but we also know that, Ernest Jones is built for that as well. Do you think that I think eventually it'll be a conversation, but do you think they immediately just hand the green dot over to Jones? I really doubt it based on the timeline, but I think it might be an eventuality.
I when you bring up that, I mean,
he's got to learn a new defense.
Weird, right?
It'd be a weird leadership thing.
It's also kind of awkward, considering like we talked to Kenneth Murray about how do you feel being the green dot guy, and he's like, I love it. It's great to be this leader of the defense.
I know.
And then all of a sudden Ernest Jones comes in and just like takes his spot. Like, that'd be a little awkward.
Right.
But I think you can't really do that either when you consider, all the players continue to talk up how impactful Kenneth is as a leader in the locker room and around that building. And I think that's something that, Ernest has been a leader for the Rams, but now he's coming into a new clubhouse and has to establish that same thing. So like Jake says in the comments, not this season, I would assume that, he probably just fills in that role and plays a very important part in Denard Wilson's defense today. However, next year, assuming they do get a contract done, this is a cornerstone piece for the Denard Wilson defense to build off of.
Well, and eventually, the Titans still don't have a cover linebacker. Like they have they have collected so many downhill run.
Notice how I said he's fine in coverage. I didn't say he was good. I said he's fine.
I mean, he's the best they've got right now, not named Cedric Gray, and that's really more upside than it is, real ability right now. So yes, I do think that eventually, maybe it's next year, maybe it's the following year, if these 2 guys are still around, they may go get a coverage linebacker and somebody gets bumped, and my money's on that being Kenneth Murray, but they'll have the season to compete to show who is the alpha in that room. We can move on here to the other trade affecting the Titans, and in my opinion, the last time we should really need to talk about this person, nothing against them personally, but Malik Willis was traded by the Titans yesterday to the Green Bay Packers. Yes, Malik Willis, in fact, fetched some trade compensation. They get a 2025 7th round pick from the Packers. The Packers arguably had the worst backup situation in the league. If you listen to beat writers in Green Bay, that's the way that they feel about it. Whether you think it's actually the worst or not, they were in bad shape, and it was a backup battle where you really wanted neither guy to win between Sean Clifford and Michael Pratt. Neither had really stuck out. So they genuinely do get an upgrade in Malik Willis. He will make the 53-man roster, which is him stepping up in the world because obviously he wasn't going to make this team's roster. I projected him to miss out and be the practice squad guy. By them trading him, it's obvious they weren't intending on keeping him. And so he gets to go and be a backup to Jordan Love and learn under an organization, a coaching staff that has a pretty long track record of developing quarterbacks. So I would, I'd feel good about that if I was a quarterback trying to step up my game up there in Green Bay. The rest of the story is the Titans stick with their guy, one of the best. I went on the radio with Blaine and Zach yesterday and made what was apparently a very provocative statement that Mason Rudolph is a top 10 at least backup in the league. I think if you just watch the games, that's pretty obvious. And if you dig into the numbers, it becomes super obvious. But that's the way I feel about him. And I don't think it was really ever a question whether he'd be their backup or not. And when you've got a guy that good as your backup, this was the point of me not wanting to keep Malik Willis the whole time. When you've got that good a backup, I don't see any reason to waste a third spot on a third quarterback. JT, what are your thoughts? Yeah,
well, first things first, how dare you insult a fellow member of my high school alma mater, Sean Clifford? Okay, how dare you? That St. Xavier bomber football. It bleeds.
Yeah, I don't feel bad about that. I'm sorry, Sean Clifford. That's just be better at football, maybe. Yeah. I don't know.
Well, okay. Second of all, before I get to the Malik Willis trade, second of all, I do want to comment on that whole Mason Rudolph top 10 backup gate debate. Controversy that you might be going through. I would like to note that Zach went back onto the radio today and put him into tiers, and he put Mason Rudolph and Tyson Bagent in the same tier.
So what tier was that? What was that?
It was like the third.
2,
so
3?
Zach went through it, Zach went through 1 through 5, and then he went 6 through 10, and Mason Rudolph was his 10th quarterback in the start of the third
tier. I don't disagree with that, but I certainly disagree with at least one guy that was at or near his level or above him, God forbid. Tyson, I mean, no disrespect to Tyson Bagent, but let's be serious now. I think that's pretty silly.
I do agree with you. I for the most part, I was pretty much on the same wavelength there, that Malik Willis probably did not have a spot on this roster, just how things shook out. Now I assumed that he was going to be their practice squad quarterback, and I think this is something that Sam Phelan brought up yesterday. This trade with Malik Willis really shows the difference in the kind of staff that the Titans now have between Mike Vrabel and running the team, kind of with an iron fist, being a player's coach, and now Brian Callahan's staff, which is a more of a developmental staff that takes a more approach to developing talent, more so than just going out there and winning with said talent. And I think that is a testament to what Ran Carthon and Brian Callahan have been able to build here with their staff. The fact that Malik Willis has progressed so much in this new system that, he has given a lot of those flashes, especially in that last game, to the point where another team was super interested in possibly bringing him in and even getting, a 7th round pick. But like we've seen the Titans this offseason do, they use those picks to also go out and get players, even though they may not make the roster, but that's another chip that they can use to continue building this team. And like you said, I think the fit for Malik Willis in Green Bay is one of the best. I don't think there's a better spot that he could go, especially with how they develop quarterbacks there. I think it's an awesome opportunity for him as well. But yeah, I mean, just, we can kind of close the book on the Malik Willis experiment.
I'm ready to be here. Again, the great guy, nothing against the person. I'm ready to be done talking about Malik Willis. And I guess the last word here is good on Ran Carthon for getting anything out of that. I love to take victory laps when I'm right. We talk about this all the time on the show. My 2 favorite things are victory lapping when I'm right and pointing out how I was a moron when I was wrong. Moron time for me. I said over and over that I didn't think there was any risk that Malik Willis wouldn't get through to your practice squad. Clearly, there was at least one team willing to trade for him. So I was wrong about that part. Right about them not wanting to keep him. Wrong about him being able to get to the practice squad. So that's on me. Okay, let's talk about the actual 53-man roster, which is out now. And so many thoughts. Let me just do a crack job real quick of sharing my screen to give folks a demonstration or a visualization rather of what we're looking at. But I can read off the list of guys that were cut. 4 terminated vested veterans who are free now to sign wherever they choose. They are not not required to go through the waiver process that will happen between now and tomorrow. Those 4 are Abdullah Anderson, Garon Christian, Corey Levin, and Shane Ray. And then the list of waived players is Trey Avery, Quentin Bohanna, Shaheem Carter, Khalid Duke, Keaton Ellis, Caleb Barley, Eric Guerra, Hassan Haskins, Isaiah Aiton, Garris Jackson, Matthew Jackson, Robert Javier, Gabe Judy Lawley, Anthony Kendall, Mason Kinsey, Braden Narvison, Bryce Oliver, Jabari Small, Cole Spencer, Leroy Watson. 2 players that were waived with an injury designation are Kyle Phillips and Latavius Simmons. 2 players put on the the injured reserve list for the full year, I believe. Linebacker Chance Campbell, obviously out for the year with an ACL, and defensive end TK McClendon, who I believe is also done for the year. Off the top of my head, can't remember what his injury was. Do you?
Turf toe, I believe, is what he was dealing with. I'm not sure if there's maybe some compounding injuries, but he has been out with turf toe. So, and
then Colton Dowell, of course, remains on the PUP list, coming back from his knee injury. So let me share my screen real quick so we can get a visualization. And if I can find, there it is. We'll share this bad boy. Here's the very polished version of the roster in my Google Sheets. Thank you.
I see some people put out there like it's just black and white and it's just the names and it's a little hard to see. But like I do have to commend you with the job that you do. Well,
thank you. So talking about some numbers, the Titans stick with 2 quarterbacks, 3 running backs, 6 wide receivers, all of that kind of expected. All of the players in those categories, as you can see in blue, were roster locks. We considered them no-brainers to make the team. First surprise is 5 tight ends, which we'll break down in detail. But David Martin Robinson, the preseason legend, the preseason sweetheart, gets in a little bit nervy there for a minute because Justin Mello tweeted it out and then took the tweet down. And you're like, wait a minute, what's happening? And then, oh, whose music is that? It's Thomas Odukoya coming from the rafters. No one is expecting it. You know, we're opining about
it's like a WWE match. It's like
right.
You think someone's going to come out and then another person just appears out of nowhere.
That's right. I spent all of last week opining about, poor Thomas O, who is going to continue to languish in international exemption designation purgatory. And then he gets not just on the practice squad as a real boy, but he's a real boy. He's now on the team, which is sick. And they keep 5 tight ends, which we'll break down more in detail. They keep 9 linemen, which we were right to go with our gut on that one on Thursday with our revisions that, they're not going to keep 10 linemen. It's 9. They keep 2 backup interior guys, 2 backup tackles. We'll talk about who those were. 1 big surprise cut in that department. 4 defensive linemen, which feels kind of light. 5 edge players. So both Rashad Weaver and Caleb Murphy get in. Those 2 can have a mid-off until they go find somebody to replace them. 7 linebackers.
Ceasefire between Zach and Mike Herndon.
That's right. Maybe we should do a charity boxing match, and whoever's it's like in Game of Thrones where you choose your champion.
Trial by combat.
Yeah. You pick a champion. Yeah. Those 2 have to rely on Mike Herndon and Zach Lyons to fight for them, which no one wants to be in that position. 7 linebackers, which just again 7 linebackers is crazy.
It's important to note.
Way, but yeah,
it's important to note it is 6 right now with the assumption that
you and your technicalities
Ernest
can
Jones.
Go take a long walk off a short
I got yelled at. I got yelled at as
by
well
Zach,
for this.
who was wrong to yell about it. So Zach can shove it. Ernest Jones is on this team. Nobody cares. The paperwork hasn't been filed. Go play in traffic. This is the last week I can say stuff like that without probably getting in trouble. Okay, and then cornerback. We've got 4 guys at the cornerback position who we're not surprised by the 4. We are surprised that it's only 4, so we'll discuss that a little bit later. And then 5 safeties. The easily the most random player to make the Titans final 53 is one Mr. Mike Brown, who didn't look bad. He had a solid camp. It was just I'd imagine he was one of 50, 51, 52, 53 on guys to get in, and special teams is going to be a big role for him. But do you want to kind of maybe start there and just get, like, as we knock these positions off, any further thoughts on Mike Brown making the roster besides the least likely guy in my mind to have made it, who made it?
Yeah, I think that is the biggest one. I think the toss up there is the 3, and we can kind of work backwards now since we went that way. We can kind of work back towards the offensive side of the ball because that's the one we know a lot more of. But like you said, Mike Brown, I think it's kind of up in the air between him and Luke Gifford for me, probably as last guy in. Maybe also throw in there Caleb Murphy in terms of last guy in and talent wise. Starting with the specialist though, the Narwhal. He's gone. Pour one out.
Anyone
people
that was rational could have told you this was happening, but for folks that wanted to cut Nick Folk, they're in shambles today. Really in shambles.
Falling to their knees at a Whole Foods or something.
Right through the lobster stand at Walmart.
Yeah. So nothing of note there. The safeties, I do agree there. Mike Brown kind of making it as an indication that Elijah Molden, probably his spot was never in jeopardy, even though he was in the concussion protocol. I think it's a special teams move for sure, because, between him and maybe like a Matthew Jackson, like those guys were not really showing anything special on defense for that Denard Wilson system to like kind of say, okay, this guy is worth keeping because of that. He definitely will play a big role on special teams. I think we saw him a lot out there as a gunner, so I think he'll be used mainly in that role. So that's why they keep him. Other than that, Amani Hooker and Quandre Diggs are going to be your 2 starters there, and then Jamal Adams getting that rotational role, maybe even playing a little bit of edge. Who knows? Like however they use him as a wild card in this blitz heavy defense is going to be interesting, I think, for sure. And then the first big topic of discussion, the cornerback room.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's interesting. No, I was just going to say.
Okay. You teeing me up here? Okay.
Yeah,
right.
I was trying to tee you up there.
That's right.
And get my reps in. Get my reps in.
Swing and a miss. I know. Yeah. I appreciate
it's a little different.
It is different. We have to adjust to the new normal.
But I gotta get my preseason reps in, I guess,
We're about out of time. So yeah, you better polish up. I'm not surprised that they didn't like any of their guys besides their top 4. Mainly because I wrote an entire article in part about how beyond their top 4 cornerbacks, Snead, Awuzie, McCreary, Brownlee Jr., the cliff is just the drop off couldn't be overstated. I'm surprised they didn't keep any as like a stopgap. You know what I mean? Like just guys that were warm bodies. Like, okay, Trey Avery's going to be on the roster for a couple more days until we sift through all the DBs that were cut today and pick who we want to bring in. Which again, they're going to do. That's what the indication is here, because you simply cannot roll into the season with 4 cornerbacks. You run out. So I saw somebody respond earlier say, can Traylon Burks play cornerback? Like you'd have to have some emergency cornerbacks get in there all of a sudden.
Mason Kinsey, emergency cornerback call up from the practice squad or something. No, sure. Like you said there, I think that's the biggest thing though. 4 corners is already sketchy, but when you have 4 corners, 2 of which Chidobe Awuzie is kind of still injured. We're still waiting for an update on him, but assuming he'll be ready for week 1. And then L'Jarius Sneed, who the entire offseason has been this knee injury could pop up anytime, and he's got to do a lot of things to manage it, so much so that he's only practiced 3 or 4 times all training camp. Like that's half of your cornerback room right now.
Right.
Like that is a scary thought, I think. And so I think, like I said, I'm basically there with you on the cornerback room assessment. And I think I tweeted this out, on the Christmas Eve of roster cutdown day. I believed that their cornerback 5 or 6 was out there on a different team. And I think we saw
you were on this.
Some interesting cuts today. I think there are a multitude of guys that they can go out and get to be veteran stopgaps behind them. Obviously, I thought maybe the biggest surprise cut for me probably was Eric Garror. That's when I thought he had a really legitimate shot to make the roster, because he was pretty good on special teams and also kind of that direct backup to Roger McCreary. I think by making this move here, it shows that Jarvis Brownlee Jr. probably will play more inside and outside. He'll have that versatility, and they'll lean on that at least for right now. But besides that, yeah, they need to go get a corner. It's non-negotiable.
Or 2. Or 2.
I wouldn't be surprised if they go and get 2 or maybe even 3, with how this roster finally shakes out. But yeah, they need help there desperately.
Fair enough that Eric Garror was your biggest surprise. But for the rest of us, I think the biggest surprise was Gabe Jeudy-Lally not making the cut. Who, in hindsight, it makes sense that it seems to me the obvious thing here is, hey, he just was too big a liability in zone coverage. You need to be able to play zone in the NFL. And we saw week in and week out, when he was out there in the preseason, this guy was either lost or out of position or both too often when they were in zone coverage. His acumen is as a cover corner, a man press corner. That's what he flashed early and often in practice in the spring and then in camp. And that's the reason why many of us thought he'd make the roster. I consider him a lock for the practice squad because that upside is still there and he just needs to learn to play zone, which I think is something that you can teach in the NFL if you have a good developer as your DBs coach, which I think the Titans do have in Chris Harris. So surprising that he doesn't make the cut, but ultimately we knew this going into today, that just the nature of the way that this year shook out, there's going to be a lot of DBs that are serviceable depth players that got cut, good players out there. And the Titans are sitting at 7 on the waiver wire claim list. So they may already have their eyes on one. Last year, the guy was Trevis Gibson. Remember him? Came in, was a Bear. They signed him as soon as roster cutdown day was over, or claimed him off the waivers, one of the two. And he was the guy that tore them up in the preseason game they played against the Bears. We need to go back, review the tape. Who was the best corner that got cut the Titans played in this preseason? That's who my money is on for them to go and get, because teams they sometimes have the blinders on and they notice a guy on a August 12th, cool, Saturday evening. They're like, ooh, if that cat's on the, it's like, have you ever heard there's an old Jeff Foxworthy joke where he's like driving through the redneck part of town. He sees a nice couch out on the street for trash pickup. And he's like, if that puppy's there after dark, she gonna be in my living room. That's what the Titans were thinking with some of the corners they saw this August. The linebacker position is next up. 7 linebackers. We've kind of already covered the fact that we don't believe that's going to stick around. I do think Luke Gifford makes the team in part due to the fact that he's the special teams ace and is going to be out there doing the special teams things. He's got a lot of money on his contract now that he's on the team that they could have saved. I mean, a lot of money, $2 million they could have saved if they'd cut him. So I'm even further surprised they end up keeping him. I'd imagine he's also there in part as a Cedric Gray insurance situation with Gray's nerve injury, the indeterminate timeline there. I think if and when Gray gets back to full health and is ready to practice and play, I think Luke Gifford is the one that ends up getting cut. JT, what about you?
Yeah, I think so. If Cedric Gray comes back, I think it is Luke Gifford ultimately. But then again, we just don't know. And this is something we'll have to find out later this week. It also, I think there is a chance that Otis Reese is also in that discussion, because I think when you're looking at linebacker 6, you're wanting that special teams prowess out of him. And I think Luke Gifford has that edge. I think with the addition of Ernest Jones as well, pigeonholes Otis Reese's, what he really does for this team. That's something that I think Ernest Jones already does. And so he becomes like the backup to the backup here. So I think that's another option as well. But ultimately, like you said, I think if Ernest Jones, that deal goes through and they go out and get another corner and we look at this roster, I think Luke Gifford is probably the first guy to go.
Right. As we continue chugging through the 53-man roster here, we appreciate you guys that are here with us live. We are reading your comments. Didn't see this until now. Our friend, Coach McAvoy. Oh, Easton is still on this show. I'll come back next week. That's tough. That's brutal. I'm still tough. Grieving the fact that I have to move on, and he's just kicking me while I'm down. Outrageous. Jacob saying, how do we fix great starting corners with terrible depth? We'll just get rid of the depth. That's, you know what? That checks out on paper. So and Damon, I can't read. Which players do you most want to see back on the practice squad? As we go, I'll kind of highlight guys that I think are practice squad locks. The first for me so far, I think Matthew Jackson, strong practice squad contender, special teamer. They seem to like him, young, talented guy. Yep. I think somebody like, Eric Gare is built to be a practice squad legend in the NFL. Gabe Judy-Lawley, also a lock special teamer, in my opinion.
I've also
keep any linebackers special teams, not practice squad, because you already have 7 on the active roster. So you kind of have a whole squad and a practice squad on the active roster at linebacker already. And that brings us to the edge position where they end up keeping 5. In my final prediction, which I tweeted out yesterday, I think, I had them keeping all 5 of these guys. Again, I think it's just going to be a mid-off between Rashad Weaver, Caleb Murphy. They both are on notice. They're on 2 strikes with their boss, and if they get strike 3, they can easily, or frankly, even if they don't, they just go find a better alternative. I think that they are both in dire need of quick improvement if they are not going to be just warm bodies waiting to be replaced with better talent on this roster. As I've been saying for weeks, they are 3 deep at this position. It is Landry and Key and Harrell that you really want out there getting significant snaps on a Sunday game day. If you're getting a lot from Weaver or Murphy, I don't think you're getting after the quarterback very much.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And so I think with those guys, I don't really see anyone. I mean, Thomas Rush probably would be the guy I would imagine makes the practice squad if they choose to keep one.
I'd honestly lead Khalid Duke at this point. I just
Really?
Rush. The upside with Rush, I'm my faith in it is dwindling as we've got 2 full off seasons from him under our belt. Both springs, I've seen something that I like, and then we get to put the pads on, and he just disappears for a month. So I don't know what to do with that, man. I don't know.
I do think there's also the possibility.
And Duke made plays. Duke did some things this
This
August.
Is true.
Like,
in the preseason, he showed up, especially the one that I think we can really go back to is that that big sack on Josh Dobbs, which it was a Khalid Duke and Keandre Coburn getting after him. Like that showed more in that one play than I think we really saw from Rashad Weaver at like all preseason. But once again, I think it's the veteran just knowing the game and having done it before is what really stood out there. I wouldn't be surprised if they also kick the tires on an edge market as well as they continue.
Oh yeah, man.
To churn here. I think Caleb Murphy could find his way onto either Caleb Murphy or Rashad Weaver could find their way being cut if they go out and find something that they like more. But like
I have less faith in that happening because I haven't done a full review of the edge market. But just as we go through the day, looking at notable players that are tweeted out by national sources like, oh, this guy's going to be on the market. How about I can't think of a single edge that I saw. And I was like, oh, I can think of one. Just kidding. Andre Carter, the outside linebacker in Minnesota, who I don't know. You and I imagine you're old enough.
Carl
to
Lawson
like
also got released from the Cowboys.
He's just cooked. He's got to be cooked at this point, right? He's got to be. How long it took for him to sign somewhere. He was with the Cowboys for a cup of coffee and they cut him. Yeah. I think he's cooked. Andre Carter is a second-year player, young player out of Army. I'm old enough to remember in February 2023 where he was considered a first-round caliber player.
There were mocks.
He was the weirdest. Yeah. He was still, in my mind, sticks out as the weirdest guy in terms of stock trajectory in the 2023 draft because he started out as like a potential first-round player, and then he went undrafted. The guy fell just like a stone through March and into April.
Yeah.
And then he got into the league, and it bore out like, yeah, okay, there's a reason why he didn't get drafted. He's still shown, frankly, from what I've seen, again, I've not been grinding all of the Andre Carter all 22, but from what I've seen, I don't see him as a significantly worse option than a Rashad Weaver or a Caleb Murphy. He's a kick the tires kind of guy.
That's what I think too. I was going to say the only other one I could think of is from that draft is Adi Tamiwa, Adebaware. Like just both those guys, very interesting. But the
way they fell,
I think if we were to rank right now on the defensive side here, okay, what do they have to go out and get? First of all, it's cornerback. Yep. Second of all, it's another cornerback. And then I think they could probably start to look around and see what's out there as far as outside linebacker.
It's edge or D line, and that kind of takes us over to the defensive line side of things. They keep 4. Not surprising that they kept 4. I think in my final mock, I had them keeping 4. But now that the dust has cleared and you're just looking at the composition of the roster, 4 does feel a little bit on the light side. They moved TK McClendon to IR, which I saw some people commenting on this. Is he on the full-term IR? The new rules this year, you can designate up to 2 players on cutdown day to be IR, designated to return players who can come back after 4 weeks, should you choose to have them back. From what we understand, the Titans didn't do that. And because it's a new rule, I don't know for sure. So just full disclosure, usually with these different designations, you saw at the beginning, we talked about guys that were waived and then waived for injury and then cut vested veteran. Like they're usually very specific about the designation that they're being cut or waived or moved with when it comes to these lists. And he was listed under the same reserve injury list with Chance Campbell. It's Chance Campbell and TK McClendon. So that's why I think that means he's done for the year. But I don't know if it's the same list and you just have to designate a guy and they didn't denote it on the Titans release. I don't know about that, but I would say I'm 75% sure that he's done for the year based on them being okay. So Alex saying PK is reporting that McClendon is done. Again, I still can't confirm that because I need to talk to Paul whether or not he's also making the same assumption that I am based on the email we all got, or whether or not he knows something for sure that I don't. But I would lean he's done for the year. That being said, I I thought somebody like Abdullah Anderson had a chance at being kind of a sneaky guy to get in there. Ultimately, he gets cut as a vested veteran. Quentin Bohanna
They got him.
They got him. He was in witness protection and everything, and the feds
They got him.
They still couldn't.
They got him, man. That's unbelievable.
Which is an indictment on
tough.
our regulatory. But okay, they probably need to shop for somebody. Ultimately, I'm not too concerned myself about them having 4 rotationally, because I think you'll be able to rotate the edge players in and out of there. And I know you and I, JT, aren't that afraid of, well, obviously Jeffrey Simmons, we know he can play a large snap count. He's done it his whole career, a heavy load. And then Tavondre Sweat, a lot of detractors would be like, oh, you need a 5th lineman on the defensive side of the ball because Tavondre Sweat's not going to be able to play more than 50, 60% of the snaps. I don't believe that. You don't believe that. And so if he's able to play 70, 80% snap share, maybe not out of the gate, maybe not right away. They do have 2 legitimate depth guys in Sebastian Joseph Day and Keandre Coburn who are going to get rotated in there. I'm not too worried about 4, though I could see them going to add a 5th. And Jacob saying Keandre Coburn using that Longhorn connection masterfully. That's right. In the professional world, you quickly realize it's less about how good you are. And it's more about who you know. And you just got to leverage those things.
I think I'm pretty content with where they are on the defensive line side of the ball because of like you said, the depth guys they have. Of course, Jeffrey Simmons and Tavondre Sweat are going to play a majority of the snaps. I have full confidence that both of them can play the majority of the snaps. Sebastian Joseph Day is kind of the perfect stopgap rotational guy. Like I can't think of another player that fits that role better than him. I think he can get in there and continue to put the pressure on. Right. And I think that's what they brought him in to do. And then Keandre Coburn, I think, flashed a lot for better or for worse, even though it was like a little bit of a joke. I do like the flashes I saw out of Keandre Coburn this year. There is a reason why he was drafted and then picked up immediately off of the Chiefs practice squad. And I think he does have a lot of good traits. I think if anything, Keandre Coburn definitely what role he'll find this year is playing that more tart nose tackle. Like if there is one guy who's going to play like a big run stuffing nose tackle type of guy, it's Keandre Coburn. He has the body to do it, and he's got the skill set to do it. And I think that's where
he's the only guy on the team that you can stand next to Tavondre Sweat and make Tavondre be like normal size.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I would say the other one was Quentin Bohanna, but they got him.
That's true.
So, I think I'm pretty okay with where the D line is. Could you always use another guy in case one of these guys go down?
If anybody goes down, it's a different picture for sure.
We've already we know Jeffrey Simmons has dealt with injuries in the past. Tavondre Sweat started out his entire rookie campaign with injury concerns, but for right now, things look good for that room, and I'm confident in the 4 guys that they have.
Yeah, people talk. I mean, I get the joke with Keandre Coburn, but we during draft season we do these thought experiments of like, well, if Marvin Harrison Jr.'s name was Jim Smith, would he still be a top 5 pick? All joking aside, Keandre Coburn, even if he had never played with Tavondre Sweat, I think he makes this roster. He just was good in the preseason, so good enough to make the team for sure. Jumping over to the offensive side of the ball, we'll start with the linemen while we're in the trenches here. The Titans end up keeping 9, which we ultimately came around to on Thursday, JT. They keep their starting 5, never in question. Latham, Skoronski, Cushenberry, Petit Frere, and Radens. And then 2 backups on the inside, 2 backups on the outside. So the guys we considered locks, never really in doubt. Daniel Brunskill and Andrew Rupchich are your swing interior guys. Rupchich is probably your direct backup to both guard spots. Daniel Brunskill is your direct backup at the center position now that they've transitioned him this offseason. And he obviously can play guard as he did for most of last season. So they're covered 2 and 3-fold on the inside. On the outside, Jalen Duncan and John Ojukwu end up making the cut. Just thrilled, floored to be able to announce that Ojukwu Mania is in fact not dead. What's the saying? The reports of my demise were greatly exaggerated. Ojukwu Mania comes up like the Undertaker, hand out of the cemetery. And good for Sonny Keeley for sticking to his guns with the Ojukwu Mania. We had the little bit of a hint that we got this weekend in the 3rd preseason game, where in that first series with the starters, they roll Ojukwu out there with Brunskill, I believe, on that goal line run, and he's the bonus tackle, and they're just going heavy, and it's Ojukwu out there. Okay, so it's not Lachavious Simmons, it's not Garon Christian, it's Ojukwu. That was the hint. We should have keyed in on that. I find it interesting, the approach here from a tackle standpoint. You're both your backup tackles, young upside players, really raw in both Jalen Duncan and John Ojukwu. With Duncan, we know that Bill Callahan likes him because the past at least 2 times we've spoken to him, he has brought up Duncan kind of unprompted. Like, I like that kid. I think he sees a lot in Jalen Duncan as a developmental player. And Ojukwu started off the summer session here as a lock, like potentially fighting for the right tackle spot when we still didn't have MPF out there. His star fell precipitously when he was no longer in contention and had a couple of weeks where he didn't really show up or, put some bad play out there on the practice field. And I feel like we all kind of tossed him aside a little bit early. He still falls into that nimble, athletic, young tackle category that I think differentiates a Jalen Duncan and a John Ojukwu from a Garon Christian or a Lachavious Simmons or a Leroy Watson, some of these older, less athletic guys. I think that gives us a little bit of a clue into what Bill Callahan's looking for in terms of linemen. We know that his MO is big, nasty fellas, but he's not looking for the big nasties that can't move. He's looking for the guys that have some athleticism to them. And so that's why Duncan and Ojukwu make the cut.
Yeah, I'm willing to eat crow on this one. I guess I did exaggerate the downfall of Ojukwu mania. I was
greatly.
I was,
we all did.
I
so
was
who are you most surprised?
It dead.
Doesn't make, like, which lineman being cut were you most surprised by? Was it Watson? Was it Christian? Was it Simmons?
It's Garon Christian.
Yeah,
just
same.
The way they were rolling him out there in the second preseason game as that kind of that
the last
tackle
2 weeks,
2.
really.
Yeah, I mean, he's been getting a lot of run, and like you said, I think it is an interesting talking point and pretty telling of how Bill Callahan likes his offensive line, in the fact that I think we kind of thought of it as, and my going theory was that, when it comes down to these players, Bill's going to go with the guy who has the experience and can be a stopgap, when in reality, Bill doesn't really care about that. And Bill wants the developmental guy that he thinks he can turn into great players. And I think that's saying a lot of Bill Callahan. Obviously, the ramifications of some of these guys that they brought in, when you look at guys like Leroy Watson, who they trade a 7th round pick for, obviously not making the team, that I think is something worth of note, considering the way Rand Carthen kind of drafted he did his draft this year, where you're getting plus players out of James Williams and Jalen Harrell, at least early into the preseason. Like, would it have been nice to maybe have another swing at a different guy there instead of trading it for a 7th in Leroy Watson and letting him go at the end of camp? That's something I think is a decision that I found interesting. But outside of that, Garon Christian is the biggest surprise, and I'm happy for the young guys, Jalen Duncan and John Ojukwu, 2 guys who, like you said, Stoney Keeley was very, very high on coming out of the draft last year. And so they end up being the studs here, and they make it out above the rest. So I think you see this group be really solid up front, but now you have some depth that is continuing to develop.
There it is.
On the backside there. And so outside of that, like you said, Daniel Brunskill, Andrew Upchich, I think those were pretty much locks. They are your backup interior guys. I will think it is interesting if, like, an MPF goes down, who gets that first spot. 'Cause we saw Jalen Duncan play both right and left tackle this preseason. So who's the guy who's first called up there?
I think
Jalen Duncan, or
I think he's the swing. Yeah, I think
so
Duncan is the swing. I think Ojukwu's going to be used as a bonus move lineman in jumbo packages, some goal line stuff like we saw from him in the 3rd preseason game. So that's what I'm expecting, but we'll see. We'll get to talk to the coaches in the next coming days and get their thoughts on the roster cut down. Let's jump past tight end, past receiver, past running back, and now work in left to right order here, because I want to save tight end for last. Quarterback. We already covered this. Really nothing to say. Congrats to Will Levis and Mason Rudolph. You're on the team. Any other thoughts on that? No.
Nope.
Okay. Running back.
I do have one.
Oh, okay.
I think they should bring in a quarterback 3, and I think it should be Sam Hartman. And the Titans just have the sexiest quarterback room, like, in terms of looks.
Going for sex appeal.
I think that's what they should do.
They should trade for Jimmy G as their 3rd on the 53-man roster, and then sign
Hartman. Man, what a
and
squad
then
there.
It's a lock. It's an all-time sexy group.
It's like
men.
the Magic Mike of the NFL right there.
It is. They're the men's Charlie's Angels of NFL quarterbacks. Okay. The running back room. You've got 3. I'm pleased by this. And this is always kind of a tricky subject because I don't want to dance on the grave of Hassan Haskins. It's a bummer that a guy lost his job. By no means am I excited that somebody is unemployed. However, as you guys can tell, I was going to be annoyed, as we talked about this the past couple of weeks, I was going to be annoyed if Hassan Haskins made this roster. I just did not see any reason to keep him on the roster as a 4th running back. God forbid he usurp Julius Chestnut, the nasty nut, who is the blue lock. I sacked up and made him a lock. He obviously was a lock. I didn't even see a tweet about he made the roster. It's like the overlords decided it was a given that, guys that are definitely making this team, Will Levis, DeAndre Hopkins,
Julius Chestnut,
right, amongst those fellows. So good for him. I am a little bit surprised ultimately that Hassan Haskins didn't make the team as his coach deemed him, the special teams demon. When you get a nickname from your coach, I expect you to maybe get in over a Luke Gifford or a Mike Brown. So I'm a little bit surprised by that. But at the same time, I am pleased that we can hopefully be done talking about Hassan Haskins. I am crossing my fingers.
I just want to put this out into the universe that I would not be surprised if Julius Chestnut is here right now. However, there is a former Bengal and very prominent and known running back out there.
The lesser known running back that's out there floating around.
Samaj P. Ryan,
only in fringe circles is this guy a known commodity.
Samaj P. Ryan is an interesting one, and I think is a conversation worth having. I think the connection there is real, and so if you were to bring him in, I would be very happy with that. However, I do like what I saw from Julius Chestnut this preseason. I think he looked markedly better than he did last season. The difference was the way they were using him and what he did with that production. We called him the preseason specialist last year, was going to put on a show, but literally this season he kind of got a little bit more of that veteran treatment. And I think that was the big difference there. And
as
so,
the roster
good
lock,
to see
he always was. So
unfortunately, I'm very glad that this is maybe one of the last times I get to talk about Julius Chestnut and hear that god awful nickname. That is something that will not come with the show.
That nickname?
That is not going
the
to
good and appropriate nickname for a nasty
staying.
Player whose last name is Chestnut. He went to Sacred Heart University. Titans legend to the nasty
call
nut.
out AJ's comment in the chat there.
I'm not going to do that. I never said anything like that. I called him by his nickname, the Nasty Nut, which is in reference to his last name. Okay. You got to be a real, and I hate you for bringing up the lesser known former Bengal that is out there on the waiver wire now. You got to be a real hot read fan to know what that's a callback to. But yeah, he's even you had forgotten because again, he's a lesser known player. Most Samaji P. Ryan discourse happens on like 4chan. You can't find it in most places. So onto the wide receiver room. Not a whole lot of thoughts here. As they continued to roll out the cuts, there was a part of me that was wondering, is there a surprise 7th receiver that's gonna bless our timeline here in a minute? And ultimately, that wasn't the case. Really, of greatest note is who I think makes the practice squad here. I think it's going to be a real battle between Kearis Jackson, Bryce Oliver, Mason Kinsey, and cut him off there, Kyle Phillips. I think that those 4 guys all belong on the practice squad in terms of talent, but they all kind of do the same thing. Mason Kinsey, the most unique amongst them, but largely they do the same thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if one of them is surprisingly not brought back, or, maybe his favorite advocate in the world, Mike Vrabel, scoops up a Mason Kinsey and finds a way to put him on the Browns roster. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that we get all 4 of those guys back on the PS?
I don't think so. I definitely think that if there's one of these guys who is most likely to get picked up, it's probably Mason Kinsey. I think there is some options out there for him. I would have thought that the Bills might be an interesting landing spot for a guy like Mason Kinsey. However, they go out and basically trade the same capital that the Titans traded today to go get I don't even remember his name, but he's a return only guy. And so they basically traded the same capital for a return only guy when the Titans
Ernest Jones money.
That's Ernest Jones money right there. I wouldn't be surprised if Mason Kinsey, I'd be rooting for the guy. Definitely. I think what he did in this training camp was markedly better than the training camps of old. I think he really stepped it up this year. as much as Mason Kinsey could step it up. And it may be worth a look. That would be perfect if we get that notification like tomorrow or Thursday. The Cleveland Browns have claimed Mason Kinsey. It'd be beautiful. If I'm looking at this one, Bryce Oliver, lock, definitely for sure. Kyrus Jackson, yes.
I think he's also a lock. I think
he's on there. The big one is that it might be time that the Kyle Phillips experience might be over.
Which is wild because I stand by him being the most talented pure receiver of the group, but we just know the injuries and the singularity of his play style. They're limiting.
Alex brings up a great point. Imagine Kyle Phillips cooking in KC.
I was going to put it up there. Unironically, would be a good move. I would like that a lot.
No, I want to see Mason Kinsey catching balls from home. That'd be fun.
Super Bowl champion Mason Kinsey catches game-winning touchdown pass from Patrick Mahomes.
There's a spot for a skinny slot boy.
Right. Kadarius Toney's on the outs.
Tony's out
they
of there.
Gotta find somebody. Rasheed Rice might be getting in trouble. Yeah, who knows? There's room. There's opportunity there. Finally, the tight end position. For my money, the room that was the most interesting of cut down day. They end up keeping 5. Again, we heard DMR's in, and then that tweet got deleted, and we're like, oh no. And then Thomas Odukoya got in, and then if you're a DMR stan, you're like, oh no, but also excited for Thomas O getting out of the international purgatory. They end up keeping all 5. 5 of the 6. Rest in peace, Steven Stilianos, who was cut yesterday. All I have to say about this is get ready to learn 12 personnel, buddy. And I don't know if both of these guys maintain their active roster positions. I could see one of them ultimately having been on the cusp and getting in just because the Titans coaching staff obviously went with the guys that they thought were the 53 best players, regardless of position, as there's some lopsidedness here. They put their money where their mouth was there. But I think they both deserve to be on the roster, as I've demonstrated by talking about them the past couple years and with DMR this month. Ultimately, I think the most interesting topic of discussion here, and I was going back and forth on Twitter a little bit with PK about this. Paul, and I'm not saying that he's dumb and wrong for this. I do think he's wrong, but I think it's an interesting conversation to have, and I don't know for sure. We're going to see who's right in the coming days. Just talking about how we were expecting this to look a lot like Cincinnati, and Cincinnati's primarily 11 personnel, 12 personnel was a curveball for them, not something they ran a whole lot of. That's what you think more of with the Titans of old, the Vrabel teams, where you don't necessarily have 3 receivers that are going to be the best players out there for you. So you roll with 2 running backs or 2 tight ends. You roll some jumbo packages out there. I think this Titans team, for a couple different reasons, I think there have been a handful of clues, if you've caught on to them the past couple of weeks, that would indicate this team is going to run more 12 personnel than you think. And as a launching point, there was a tweet from Jacob Gibbs on X yesterday actually. He tweeted out the percentage of preseason snaps with 3 or more receivers on the field. So this percentage of 11 personnel looks, and he gave the 5 teams that were at the top and the 5 teams were at the bottom of that percentage. The Titans were dead last in the league with 11 personnel looks in the preseason. Now he did stipulate that while they only ran 40% of their preseason snaps with 11 personnel, they did run 65% of their snaps while Levis was on the field in 11 personnel. So that 40%, I think, is largely due to the fact that outside of the starters, this team lacked a lot of receivers that needed to be out there for them to evaluate in the preseason. Didn't have a whole lot of big body guys to play that X position. So, you roll 2 out there for a lot of it. I think 65 is a lot closer to what the real number is going to look like. But for reference,
that's still pretty low if you look at the percentages too. Like,
right, it's like middle under the median point in the league. Yep. in terms of 11 personnel usage. But I think 65% is roughly what to expect. And we were talking about this with Zach and Stoney last night in a chat of ours. For reference, and this is from Zach, he pulled these numbers. The Bengals last year, 72.2% of their snaps were 11 personnel. In contrast, the Titans, 53.8%. I think 65%, kind of in between those two numbers, is that sweet spot the Titans will be hitting a lot of this year. If you've listened to Brian Callahan's press conference remarks the past couple of weeks, he has continued to hint that we're going to have more looks with, 2 tight ends, 2 running backs, not 3 receivers than maybe folks are expecting. And so our tight end room is important to us. Our running back room is important to us. We're gonna roll these guys out there. And you look at the roster design of 5 tight ends. You're definitely gonna probably see more 12 personnel when you're that heavy at the tight end position. And then to kind of put a bow on that, we were talking with Stoney Keeley at our Memos live show we did with him and Zach. It was about a month and a half ago. And he was talking about how, man, when you watch the tape of Bill Callahan coached offensive lines, they sure do love to run a lot of 12 personnel. That's something that they excel in, especially in the run game. These guys will be running a lot of 12 personnel if Bill Callahan has any say in it. I think that he does. And so I just think that our initial reaction to what the Brian Callahan offense will look like, based on the fact that he was, an architect of the Cincinnati offense, and thinking, it might be a kind of a 1-to-1 plug and play with the Cincinnati offense into Will Levis and the Titans offense. I think we were, and I was, I'll take a victory lap here again, because I do love it. I think I was right when we first brought in Brian Callahan to the discussion on the show, saying, I wonder what it's going to look like with Levis as opposed to Burrow. Talking about Callahan as not just an offensive architect, but a quarterback whisperer, somebody that has been chameleonic throughout his career, shaping an offense to the strengths of the quarterback. And Burrow and Levis, their skill sets, their profile kind of being different, right? I said this more times than folks probably wanted to hear in the spring. Hey, Burrow's more of an air it out, spread it out, throw it, 30 to 40 times a game, and throw a lot of short stuff and throw inside the hashes. And then Levis is kind of let's throw 20 to 30 times a game. Let's take some deep shots. Let's throw in the flat, but let's also push the ball downfield 10, 11 yards per attempt. Let's throw outside the numbers. They're kind of different guys in terms of their strengths, their skill sets. And so I think this is kind of a reflection of that general ethos from the spring, that, hey, he's going to be tailoring this offense to Will Levis. And, hey, some more 12 personnel looks is going to benefit them in the run game and the way that this offensive line is going to work well. And it might benefit a player like Will Levis, who's a unique player, who's, he's going to play different than a Joe Burrow did.
Yeah, I totally agree. You bring up an interesting point that with these 5, I think the 5 on the roster, I think we need to talk about the way that they're going to use the run game. I think the run game is going, as we bring in, oh my God, they're finally throwing the ball. I think this only enhanced the run game that Tennessee can actually use, between what they did with how they went out and got Tony Pollard, getting Tyjae Spears more into the mix, the kind of renaissance of Dylan Radins and MPF looking very, very strong on that right side of the line. And the way that they continue to just throw out looks and use motion on basically every single play throughout the preseason, especially in that last game. I think that bringing these guys in and having, a Thomas Odukoya, a DMR, and a Nick Vannett in the run game is going to be invaluable to them. And so from that standpoint, I think the only other interesting thing with the tight ends is what PPG brings up. And he says, any chance that they kept the best players to trade one later? For example, keeping 5 good tight ends, knowing you probably don't need that many, but knowing they probably have a better trade value than a random 53. And I think this is something that was brought up earlier today, not sourced or anything, but I believe Terry McCormick was the first person to bring it up, wondering, if they do end up keeping Thomas Odukoya and DMR, does that maybe, in seeing the kind of rise of DMR in this offense over the preseason, does that make Chigakonkwo maybe an interesting trade target?
Yeah, I didn't expect to spend part of today wondering if Chigakonkwo could be on the block. But if you're planning on keeping DMR around and you are comfortable with him in that F move tight end role, we're a Chigakonkwo show. We have been for a couple of years now. I'm a believer in his abilities. I'm also a believer in DMR, and I want to see it in real games against real competition. But I think that the drop off from Chig to DMR may not be as big as folks think. And if they've got this depth that they believe in at tight end on their roster, somebody like Chig, especially when you have a 1A, 1B situation with Wiley, who, in terms of a receiving threat, may already, with Chig on the roster, be poised to take over this year in terms of demand. You got to. There's an expendability there. He may be your best expendable player in that way. So I think there's some teams out there that may be tight end needy and would make sense to scoop him up. I floated the Colts on social media pretty much just to piss people off. But Jelani Woods going to season-ending IR. They have I don't think in the history of the Colts organization dating back to like the 1800s, I don't think they've ever had a good tight end. So, they're
Put some respect
notorious.
on Dallas Clark's name and Anthony Gonzalez.
Great point. That's a great point. It's been decades since they've had a good tight end. Let's put it that way. Or a decade. It's been a long time. Okay. And so that's that. I think that anything else you want to get off our chests here? I mean,
Alex brings up a good point. I'm not sure if the Titans have enough tight ends. Has anybody called to see if Jeff Swaim is he available?
I need the mods to block the people that mention Jeff Swaim in the comments. We're done with that. We're moving on. Okay. I think that's it for us today. Hey, like I mentioned at the top of the show, today was my second to last episode of the Hot Read podcast, which we've gone along today already. So I'll save the goodbyes for Thursday. On Thursday, we've got a fun one to end on, not ending on just any old show. We are diving into the second annual Titans Take Purge, something that I hope JT and Sony will continue on. Maybe I'll have to weasel my way back in as a guest in the future to come back on the Purge, because I love this episode. It's where we get takes off of our chest before the season that we don't fully believe, but we do think about them. They are there, up there in the back of our heads. And maybe they're worries. Maybe they're things we're excited about, but we don't quite want to commit to. It's a fun discussion ahead of the season. We'll be doing that on Thursday, and then we'll say our goodbyes. Maybe a little trip down memory lane with the Hot Read podcast. The last 2 years with JT in particular have been fantastic.
I'll be bringing some surprises.
Okay, so I've got some surprises in mind as well. We might be making fun of past versions of ourselves. We'll see. It's going to be a good time. You'll want to tune in. I would appreciate if you tuned in for the last edition of JT. I've done how many of these have I done? Let me real quick. I'm going to pull it up really fast. How many episodes have I participated in on the Hot Read podcast? Let's find out.
334.
That sounds about right.
It's around there.
My thing's not loading at all, so this is making for really awkward radio here.
I can definitely look.
Yeah, and it logged me out. Better. You can look for it, but we can have that number ready for Thursday, so that's fine.
I have it right now.
Hundreds of episodes.
I'm
goated like that.
Yeah, I'm goated like that. 335. I was one off. Wow,
you were one off.
Damn.
So this will be 336, and then I'll end on 337. So that's a heck of a run. We'll save the sentimentality until then. And I'm not, for folks that may be curious, I'm not leaving the Titans market. I am not leaving Nashville. I will just be doing a different thing, which I'm excited to announce at the beginning of next week, probably next Monday or Tuesday. So keep a lookout for that on social media. Make sure you're following us on social media at Hot Read Pod, at Easton Freeze, at J2_Ruhnke. And we'll be back on Thursday with my final episode, the Titans Take Purge for 2024. Until then, appreciate you guys tuning in with us for a cut day recap. We will talk to you on Thursday.